started. There was some good sharing. So I'm going to share my screen. And
There it goes.
let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today we're going to talk about Guatemalan internee mail during World War II. This sort of piggybacks on the presentation I did last year on the Germans in Guatemala. So I will give a little bit of background, and then I'm going to talk about the deportations, the internment camps, and a little bit of the aftermath. So not to go through the entire Germans in Guatemala presentation, but as most of you know, in the 1930s, Germans had tremendous economic power in Guatemala. They owned a majority of the coffee plantations. They were deeply involved in the rail transportation, importing of farm equipment and clothing, other staples, deeply involved in banking, shipping. And in the early 1930s, when, and I'll refer to as the NASDAP, which is the Nazi Party, when the Nazi Party started to come to power in Germany, it began to exert its influence in Guatemala. And the German consulate was the center of that influence. Just to illustrate with a few covers here, these are some sample covers from Germans. The upper right is from one of the Germans who ran a plantation for Friesen Company. We have VP Dieseldorf, one of our favorite German planters. Bottom left is the Nadavan brothers, who in the late 1930s and early 1940s became notorious. They were #1 on the hit list for U.S. intelligence and the U.S. government, because they were deeply involved in Nazi politics and had quite a bit of money and quite a bit of economic power. So these are three 1930s covers from them. This is the first documented confirmed contact between Germans in Guatemala and the Nazi Party. This was sent from an employee at Magli and Company in Guatemala City to the NASDAP headquarters in Munich. And this is before they built the big headquarters there that Hitler used to go to all the time in 1933. This is a 1930 cover sent to them. So we can see the contact and the influence starting as early as 1930, before the NASDAP actually seized total power in Germany. As I mentioned, the German consulate was responsible for all the German activity, not only in Guatemala, but Central America. It was the lead legation. So all of the other consulates in Central America, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panama, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all fell under the authority of the minister at the consulate in Guatemala City. The other really interesting thing about the German setup in Guatemala is most countries have a diplomatic presence primarily in the capital. Guatemala also, or Germany also had consulates in Coban and Quetzaltenango. So in 1934, Hitler sent his own minister over to represent his interests. And the consulate became a center not only for Nazifying Germans living in Guatemala, but for propaganda, which quickly turned to anti-American and anti-British propaganda, and to espionage. And this is a 1931 cover from the German consulate. If you can see in the upper left, it says for Middle America and Panama. So just to show that they really were the center of everything. Okay, in 1941, before the U.S. entered the war, the U.S. government was very concerned about the Nazi activity, and months before Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed an executive order, which was the proclaimed list of certain blocked nationals. These were people that had some kind of Nazi ties, and it prohibited any American firm from doing business with them. Now, the list changed frequently, and it wasn't just for Guatemala. It was for all of Latin America. So Mexico, Central America, South America, each had their own section in the proclaimed list. The Guatemala list was extensive. It started out small in July, and within a month, it had more than quadrupled. It was built based on inputs from the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. legation in Guatemala City. So as they received reports of people of Germans with Nazi ties, they would consult with General Ubica's government, and then they would forward the names on to Washington, where they would be put on the list. Occasionally, they also removed people from the list. I mentioned E.P. Dieseldorf later. David Linwall and I have talked about him frequently. He was actually a German Jew who was not involved in Nazi politics at all. Dieseldorf and Company, that was run by his relatives, was involved in Nazi politics. So Dieseldorf and Company was on the list, but he was specifically excluded, and they even put a footnote in saying, this is not E.P. Dieseldorf. But this changed frequently. They would put out updates to it and it would be promulgated to U.S. businesses. And it's really fascinating. It's available on the Hathiat Trust library, and you can just scroll down through the names and the businesses with their addresses and match that against things in your collection. This was also used later on as the basis for deportations. Okay. So the proclaim list put a lot of pressure on German businesses. Matter of fact, when it first came out in 1941, a lot of Germans started to use shadows or masks for their businesses. So they would hire Guatemalans a lot of times to do their business. And the embassy was very busy trying to uncover who these masks or beards were. They also transferred properties into the names of relatives or friends so that it wouldn't be in their names. Now, December 7th, the U.S. enters World War II. 4 days later, on 11 December, President Ubico declared war on Germany. Ubico found it to be pragmatic, even though there are reports that he kind of admired Hitler and the authoritarian regime. It was a lot more practical to be friends with the big power close to you than the big power far from you. And so he declared war. As a matter of fact, there's a story that says that when Hitler found out that Guatemala declared war on Germany, he says, "Where's Guatemala?" Looking at the map, trying to figure out where it was. He immediately ordered all schools and the German clubs to be closed. And the legation was expelled on 23 December. And I've got a couple of covers to illustrate that. Bottom left, this is a picture taken of the members of the German club at it's a postcard, approximately 1898. On the right is a cover to one of the teachers at the German school in Guatemala City. The German schools in Guatemala City and Quetzaltenango, the police actually went in during classes with batons. And they basically said, drop what you're doing, leave the building. And they padlocked the building. So students left their textbooks and work on the desks, and they were all escorted out. Why the German schools, you might ask? In 1938 and 1939, Ubiko was worried about the Nazification of the German community, and he actually dissolved their charters, and they were rechartered under a new board of directors, and it was contingent on them not Nazifying the students. Um, that didn't last very long, and many of the teachers who came over from Germany to teach the students there were hardcore Nazis. There were pictures of Hitler, Nazi flags. Students, the male students wore brown uniforms with swastikas on their armbands. They tried to participate in 1941 in a parade in Guatemala City um, that caused a lot of political turmoil for Obiko. So we immediately closed those down. The German clubs, also in Coban, in Quetzaltenango, and in Guatemala City, were also immediately shut down. So then what do you do with the German legation, which is behind all of this and stirring up all the hate and discontent? They were expelled and they left on the SS Jamaica on the 23rd of December, 1941. And they went back to Germany by way of New York. The legation tried to save as many of the hardcore Nazis as they could and who could easily leave the country. They issued a number of diplomatic passports to businessmen and other Nazi leaders in Guatemala City under the guise of them being commercial uh, consuls. So these are two covers from German businessmen who left on the Jamaica under diplomatic passports with their families to escape back to Germany. And by the way, when the consulate was closed, just a side note, um, uh, Gebhard Diestel was a German businessman in Guatemala, big in the coffee trade, and his wife was Anita Rader. Anita was the daughter of Grand Admiral Rader, who was the chief of naval operations for Germany. He was the head of the German Navy. She was there in Guatemala, and she became the caretaker, basically, of the consulate. So she was in charge of the building, but there were no actual diplomatic functions. But she continued through. If you've seen any covers from the Libreria Cosmos, that was a German-owned bookstore and stationery store, and she had a lot of anti-American propaganda printed and distributed, and couriers would come and pick it up for other consulates. So, what to do about the Germans? The U.S. Embassy consulted with General Ubiko, and Ubiko agreed to deport many of the Germans. Now, he was very careful about this. He did not want to deport Guatemalan citizens because he didn't want to have domestic unrest. And so he vetted the lists that were given to him by the embassy. The first list they came up with were what were considered to be the most dangerous Germans, the ones who were party members, who had been very vocal in support of the Nazi Party, and they were notified and asked to report to their local police station for the first round. And they showed up with suitcases and clothing, and they were deported to the U.S. The first wave, and take a look at the dates here. The first wave left on the 12th of January. That's just over a month after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And it's less than a month after Guatemala declared war. So 115 Germans were rounded up and they were taken down to Puerto Barrios and they were loaded onto a U.S. Army transport ship. They were sent up to New Orleans and the U.S. government said, well, we're going to intern you, but gee, we don't have any internment camps ready. So they were sent to Camp Blanding in Florida, and they were there for about 6 months. Uh, in the meantime, immigration and the Justice Department were setting up detention camps all around the country. So the detention camps were not only for obviously Germans from Guatemala, but they were for people in the U.S. Everyone is familiar with the Japanese, especially the ones in California who were interned. There were Germans in the U.S. who were interned, and then from throughout Central and some of South America, they were also sent there for internment. On this first shipment, some of the most notorious Germans included one of the Nadaman brothers, Max Patel, who had a big import company, August Jaeger, who was a engineer and car mechanic, Rudolf Bunge, who was a businessman down in Puerto Barrios. The one on the right is a cover from Bunge. So they were all deported on this first wave of deportations. Okay, second wave. In April, the U.S. government sent the U.S. Army transport ship Florida to Panama, where they picked up Germans from the Republic of Panama and from the U.S. Canal Zone. They stopped in Costa Rica, picked up some Costa Rican Germans, and then they stopped in Puerto Barrios, where there were 21 more dangerous Germans that had been picked up by Ubico and prepared for deportation. One of them was Erwin Flor in Coban, who owned a large coffee plantation. And this is a earlier cover from him. Okay, round three. The list begins to expand. And at the same time, General Ubico saw this as a good opportunity to change the economic balance of power in the country, because he realized that he could expropriate these coffee plantations and redistribute them to Guatemalans. Also, a lot of the businesses could be expropriated, and that would give more economic opportunity for Guatemalan businesses. So they rounded up another group. The exact number is not known. They're not comprehensive lists that I've found yet, but a large number were rounded up, and but the problem was there were no U.S. Army transport ships available, and so throughout November and December of 1942, they played with the idea of sending them by train through Mexico. That was actually shot down for a couple of reasons. One was that there had been some heavy rains, and some of the rail lines needed to be repaired. But secondly, they were worried about German sentiment in Mexico and anti-U.S. sentiment in Mexico, and the possibility of somebody stopping the train and letting all these guys loose. So the U.S. Army sent some transport planes down to Guatemala and flew them into Laredo, Texas. So here we have a cover from one of the, it's a earlier cover, but from one of the Germans. This is from Wilhelm Feister, who owned the Actella Finca. Okay, and then we have wave 4. The U.S. Army transport ship Cuba was sent to Guatemala in November of 43. They also stopped throughout Central America. So you had detainees from Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. A lot of these were people that were probably less of a threat, but had expressed anti-American and pro-Nazi views. So 4 waves of deportations sent to the United States. A total of about 3,000 Germans in Guatemala were deported. There were also a couple of repatriation. I'll mention this sort of as an aside, there was a couple of repatriation ships that were German passenger ships that or German ships that took people back to Germany. So some people just said, okay, I'm going to go back to Germany. And some of them were able to get out that way. But as far as deportations of the U.S., four distinct waves. This is just a map that shows some of the places where they were, the primary places where they were detained. Camp Landing, as I mentioned, in Florida, that was temporary. Camp Kennedy in Texas, Crystal City, Texas, Seagoville, Texas, Stringtown, Oklahoma, and Camp Bismarck in North Dakota. So we'll take a look at each of these. Camp Landing. This is the first place they went. This is a postcard showing Army recruits arriving there at Camp Landing. 115 Germans were sent there, and they were there for approximately 6 months. They were in a makeshift stockade. Now on the philatelic side, mail was interesting because people didn't know how am I going to send a letter to my loved one. So each of the detainees, or most of the detainees, apparently sent some kind of letter or card back saying, okay, here's how you address it. There are numerous complaints in State Department records from detainees saying they did not receive their mail or their mail was stolen. Families sent care packages. Families sent letters, and for various reasons, it didn't arrive. Now, obviously, a lot of the mail, or all of the mail rather, was censored. But was it stolen by the censors? Or held by the censors? Was it stolen by other prisoners? Who knows? Okay, this is from my collection. This is to Emil Sterkel from a relative of his in Koban. And this was sent May of 42 to Emil at Camp Landing, as you can see the stockade number 2. So he was one of the dangerous ones who was in that first wave. You can see the U.S. censor there. I'm going to talk a little more about Guatemalan censorship markings in a few minutes. Here's the reverse of this, and it was sent through Guatemala City. Okay, now this is another one. This is actually from the collection of Louis Facet. And I want to thank Michael for tipping me off to this. Michael actually judged his one-frame exhibit on internee mail at Pipex last year. And he's got a really nice one to Hans Loescher at Camp Landing, which also has the U.S. censor. This is from April. Hans Loescher was a teacher at the German school in Guatemala City. Okay, Camp Kennedy, Texas. This used to be a CCC camp during the early days of the New Deal. And it had fallen into disrepair, and the U.S. government went in and fixed it up and turned it into an internment camp. Most of the Germans from Guatemala were held here at Camp Kennedy. Camp Kennedy also held Germans from a lot of the other Latin American countries. There were some from the U.S. There was also some Japanese, but a lot of the Guatemalan Germans were here either for their entire time or for part of their time while they were interned. The camp was built for unaccompanied men, and we'll talk about families here in a minute. So this is from Wilhelm Assenberg. He was a plantation owner. He owned the Finca Candelaria Solhuitz and its 5 annexes, huge coffee plantation. He was actually deported in the 3rd wave. And if you note there in the bullets, he was 69 years old. But because of his support, his vocal support of the Nazi regime, he was packed onto a plane and sent out to Kennedy. This was sent just 2 days after he arrived at Camp Kennedy. Now, on the bottom right, you'll see this marking, Abierto por la Censura Guatemala Defensa Continental. This was the official censor marking that Guatemala used. Okay, it's not very common. I don't think I've seen more than 5 examples of this. That doesn't mean that Guatemalan mail was not censored. I've seen some dispatches in the State Department files where the ambassadors has mentioned that Guatemala was censoring a lot of mail. So I suspect that there was a lot that was censored. They simply didn't put a marking on it. A lot of Guatemalans figured their mail was being censored. That's why you see a lot of times stamps on the flaps to try and keep someone from steaming it open and looking what's inside. Um, the but this marking is specifically on this, and my unsupported wild theory is that when they had mail destined for internees, they wanted to show the U.S. government, yes, we're also censoring on our side. The bottom left is out of the postmarks of Guatemala by Cecile. Okay, from Louis Facet's collection, here's another one to Helmut Sapper. If you recall, Sapper Company was a major owner of coffee plantations in Guatemala. He was also interned at Camp Kennedy for a period. There's the reverse of that one. Okay, Crystal City, Texas. This was set up for internees that were there with their families. When everybody realized that the war was not going to be as quick as some people might have hoped, they looked at the possibility of reuniting families. The problem in Guatemala was that when the breadwinner left, these families had nothing to live on. The government a lot of times seized their bank accounts, seized their plantations, seized their businesses. There was a German beneficent society that was set up where the Nazi government funneled money through Switzerland to help the families. It was not very much. It was a small monthly stipend to barely live on. It was, but the Nazi government tried to support these families. So a number of families opted to go be with their breadwinner in internment. I don't have any from German Guatemalans in Crystal City. This one is actually to the International Red Cross from the spokesman for the German group at Crystal City. And if I recall correctly, I think he was a German in the U.S. who was interned. But every ethnic group, so the Germans and the Japanese, both had a spokesman or a committee of spokesmen who interacted with the authorities, and they would bring complaints, everything from, we don't have any hot water to, we need, more sweaters and winter clothing. There was one complaint from one of the Germans, and I don't remember which one offhand, who brought his stamp collection with him, and it was confiscated by immigration and never returned. So there's probably items out there on the market that belong to this poor fellow. And he kept complaining about not having a stamp collection with him. Okay, Seagoville, Texas was another camp that was also set up for internees with families. And the families that came from Guatemala usually came on United Fruit Company ships. They'd get passage on the ship, go to New Orleans, and voluntarily, where they would then be classified as detainees and sent to join their family member in the camp. Again, I don't have any from Seagoville from German Guatemalans, but this is to the International Red Cross from the Family Camp Committee at Seagoville. But this is to the committee in Washington, D.C. Okay, Stringtown. Most of the Guatemalan Germans were, like I said, at Kennedy. or at one of the two family camps. There were some disturbances within the Germans at Kennedy. There were some that tried to uh, uh, organize passive resistance to the Americans and continue their Nazi ideology. There were other Germans who said, "Okay, we're in enough trouble. Let's not, let's not poke let's not poke the dog here." And the troublemakers were removed from Kennedy, and some of them were sent to Stringtown. This is sent to Alfred Wagner by Irene Wagner, uh, who was his sister-in-law. Irene Wagner's husband and brother-in-law were both interned. She had not heard from him, but she had heard from her brother-in-law. This has the U.S. Censorship mark on it. It's just a postal card. And what's interesting is she wrote it in English, possibly to make sure it cleared the censors more quickly. So she talks about some family business. And she also talks about the rumors she had heard about families being able to join the head of household, and that she hoped that that was true, so that the family could go, so that she and her kids could go be with her husband. No Guatemala censor on this one, but this was still early. This was still 42. Okay, here's another one, also to Alfred Wagner in Stringtown from Louis Fisette's collection. Bismarck, North Dakota. If you can imagine going from the land of eternal spring to Bismarck, North Dakota in the wintertime. Big change here. Bismarck was also a place where they sent some of the troublemakers to keep them from causing trouble with the other prisoners. Rudolf Herman was the owner of the Finca La Fama in Colomba, which is near Quetzaltenango. He was deported in the third wave, and this was sent to him by his wife. And so there's her return address and the franking. I do want to point out that, let me go back to the previous slide. It was also sent registered mail. They started doing everything registered because they thought it would have a better chance of getting to the addressee. Of course, if there was anything in there that the censors found objectionable, they would seize the letter and not deliver it. But they really wanted to try and get their mail there. So there's the reverse. At least one of Herman's family members, and it was either a brother or possibly a son, was a member of the Nazi Party in Germany. When you look at the list of official party members in Germany, we're not talking about the party in Guatemala, but the party in Germany that were captured at the end of the war. They have there's a list of party members in Germany who are living in other countries, and they had a list of the Central American countries by country. And so a number of the Guatemalan Germans were, there's several pages of them that were members of the party back in Germany. This one on the lower left of the envelope also has the Guatemalan censor marking. So that's 2 of the 6 that I've seen. This is an interesting one, and if Louis Fisette ever wants to sell it, I'm first in line to get it from him. This one was to Helmut Sapper, who had been transferred to Bismarck, but then apparently he behaved himself because he was sent to Fort Lincoln in near Seattle, Washington, and he worked in some public forest there on parole. This is the only example that either Louis or I have seen of parolee mail, where he was actually on sort of like a work release, where he could go out and work in the forest during the day and come back at night. Also interesting here, and I don't know if anybody else here has seen this. If you look at the left, this has Abierta por la Censura Militar, Guatemala. I've never seen a paper tape with a Guatemalan military censor during World War II. And so as far as I know, this is the only example. The aftermath. Okay, so a large number of the Germans that were seized in Guatemala and deported to the U.S. were actually exchanged with Germany for U.S. civilians captured in Europe, businessmen, people there on vacation, who were held as detainees in Europe. So we had several prisoner swaps between the U.S. and Germany. They were brokered by Switzerland. So a lot of them were sent back to Germany. There were some that were still held there at the end of the war. And when the war ended, the problem is, what do you do with them? A lot of them, of course, wanted to go back to Guatemala. Guatemala refused to take the most dangerous ones. So, for example, the Nottaboms, no way they were going to let them back into the country. So a lot of them either went to Germany. There were a number that went down to Brazil. Brazil admitted several of them. And there are a lot of cases of Germans from Guatemala, then family members going down to Brazil to be with their head of household. So Brazil welcomed quite a few of them. There were a few that were allowed to come back. Some of them came back illegally. They snuck back into the country. Others kind of 5-6 years after the war slipped back, just came back into the country when people had kind of forgotten about the blacklist and the deportations. This is an interesting cover. Martin Natsish was the general operations manager of the Nottabom Bank and very close friends with the Nottaboms and another avowed Nazi. This is from his wife to the assistant chief of the Special War Problems Division. This was the group at the State Department that was in charge of detained foreign nationals. And he was one of the ones that was held on to until after the war. I suspect she was not sending a Christmas card. She was probably saying, please let my husband go, or please, treat my husband well. This is the reverse of that cover. He was, U.S. intelligence considered him to be a dangerous Nazi. Okay, so some of the key points of what we've talked about today. When the Germans were deported, we had a big economic power shift in the country. It broke up the German community in Guatemala. Were there Germans after the war? Of course there were, but not as many and not nearly as influential as they were before. The Guatemalan government did censor mail. A lot of it was censored without markings, and it's hard to tell if it was actually censored or not. The few markings there are not very easy to find. I suspect that the censorship markings that were there just to show the American government, yes, we're doing our part and we're checking out to make sure there's no inappropriate information in the letter. The other thing I just want to mention, internee covers are not common, but they're also overlooked a lot of times. A couple of them I found just listed as, oh, here's a letter from the U.S. to Guatemala, or from Guatemala to the U.S. And it's not recognized that it's an internee cover. When they do recognize them, by the way, they're very, very expensive. But those are the key points. So I'll take questions. And this is, by the way, a picture of Camp Kennedy, where most of the Guatemalan Germans were held.
Come on.
Questions, anybody?
It's extraordinary. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's extraordinary to me that you were able to spot these. The covers themselves look like very common covers, but you spotted the meaning, the individuals. That's incredible. Also, Richard, by the way, I purchased a lot of the Hennig airmail collection, a lot of that doesn't fit my collecting interests. And it's now on eBay. And I know you've purchased at least one um, from Stamp Lister. So keep checking out Stamp Lister.
Okay, I'll watch for that.
Okay.
Yeah. These aren't easy. I've been over the Proclaim list many times, so I haven't memorized it, but I know most of the names. So when I see a name, when I see a 1940s cover, I'm immediately looking at it.
Right.
I picked up a couple for very little, as much as $5 or $10. I have one that I picked up that cost me 450, but still, it's nice to kind of accumulate that and tell the whole story. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Um, Richard, could you tell us a little bit about what happened to the rest of the Guatemalans, the Germans in Guatemala?
The ones that were not deported?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, some of them stayed there and continued their businesses. There were some that had not been involved in Nazi politics, and they just sort of continued with their lives. Family members, or people that lost their businesses. Some of them went to other countries. Some of them, uh, some of them just had to downsize to a more menial job. But it really was dispersed. The German community for decades had been a very tight knit and united community. They intermarried. Everybody knew everybody else. After this, it was every man and woman for him or herself. So they were still there, but no sort of influence at all, and they just kind of fade into the background.
Well, what about, you said that about 3,000 were deported?
Yes.
So that would be 3,000 out of how many total Germans were in Guatemala in the 40s?
Um, David Limwell, help me out. I'm trying. I think the total number was around maybe 5 to 8,000. Does that sound right?
I don't know the number, but I would guess that it was probably over 5,000. An interesting thing is that you still have, many German families in Guatemala today. A lot of the businesses still have German names. In fact, the Winter family, of course, has a lot of properties in the Coban area. For many, many years, owned a transportation company there. So there are many of the German last names that you still see in businesses in Guatemala. So
Yeah,
some
but
survived there.
but a lot of they started intermarrying with Guatemalans um, in the 20s, teens, 20s, 30s. Most of the intermarrying, not all, but a large amount of it was done within the community. So, German men would take German wives, either bring a wife over from Germany or marry a gal that was, from the German community there. Um, After World War II, there was a lot more so it was the the Germanness uh, was less pronounced. But yeah, there are still a lot of Germans there, but they a lot of them consider themselves more Guatemalan than directly identifying with their German ancestry. Other questions?
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Really enjoyed watching it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and a lot of the individual stories are really interesting. One of the deportees, he was deported with his son, and they were prisoner swapped back uh, to Germany, and the son was young uh, and able to work, and so he went off to work in a iron factory, and dad went back to was it Gossinger? There was his familial hometown, and he was actually killed in an Allied bombing raid. And the son, years later, made it back to Guatemala, but the family had nothing, and so he ended up selling paint for a hardware store. So it's interesting how they went from being at the economic and social top rung of the ladder to a lot of times, falling down, near the bottom. Just a note on the expropriations. The ones who were deported, all of their properties were expropriated. And and some of the families fought that in court. If the owner of the property was on the blacklist and deported, they never won their case in the Guatemalan Supreme Court. There was a case, I didn't have his cover there, but I've got a cover from Hugo Droge, who owned 2 plantations. He was deported. He was exchanged back to Germany, and he eventually made it back to Guatemala, where he died in Coban at the age of like 101. But before the war, he had 2 plantations. When he was single, he took a common law wife, indigenous wife, and had 4 children with her. And then he got a proper German wife. And when she came over, she wasn't too thrilled about, by the way, I've got this other wife and 4 kids. So he lived with his German wife at the other plantation and had several kids with her. He was deported, and the government seized both plantations. The common law indigenous wife went to court and said, well, Ubico passed a law saying that, if I could prove I was with him for 5 years and I was actually his, common law wife, I have a right to part of his property. And the German courts said that she did. And so they gave her the plantation where she had been living. The German wife was denied the plantation where she had been living. And she ended up going to Guatemala City, renting a room there. And when her husband came back, they scraped together a little bit of money, bought a very small plot of land back up in Coban, and quietly lived there. But he was very bitter, hated the U.S., and said it was all our fault. By the way, he was one of the ones who was a member of the party over in Germany, one of the first ones to sign up.
So when did the Germans arrive in Guatemala? And can you trace philatelically some of the families that were deported back into the 30s and 20s?
Oh yeah, the first ones arrived in the 1850s, but the big waves came in the 1880s. A lot of them started coming over then. That's when the coffee plantations really took off. You had a number of merchants over in Hamburg. A lot of them came from the Hamburg area, and they realized, hey, there's good land here. There's a lot of money to be made in exporting coffee to Europe. So 1880s is when a lot of them came. So a lot of these families, a lot of the deportees, you could trace their families back. There are some that are newer, like the one I showed you. There was a teacher at the German school. That was not an old established family. That was a newer person who had come over, specifically to teach at the school. So you had some newer arrivals, but in the 30s, a lot of people came. But some of the family names are still there. Dieseldorf is still there. There's still Dieseldorf coffee. So some of these family names, as David mentioned, are still in Guatemala. But yeah, so by 1940, you had sort of 2 groups. You had the old school Germans who had really come over during the time of the Kaiser, during the time of the German Empire. And then you had the newer arrivals, the younger Germans who were more prone towards the Third Reich. What's interesting is that a lot of times in families, the families would split. So the fathers who had actually come over they were anti-Nazi, but their sons became Nazified. Their sons in their 20s and 30s. So you had conflicts within families. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I suppose there's a lot of publications about this, or some.
There are some out there. A lot of records I've had to dig up through National Archives or through other records. There's actually a nonprofit group, uh, uh, GAI, G-A-I, German American Internee Coalition. It's family members of people of German ancestry who were interned in the U.S. and they're an advocacy group because there's an apology to the Japanese for their internment, a lot of recognition of Japanese internments in the U.S., but not much about the German internments. So they've got some interesting documents on their website also.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yes, Richard, I agree. It's an outstanding presentation, very much appreciated.
Other questions, folks? We still have 5 minutes left.
Where did you say the list of names was for the actual people who were interned?
I get it from the Hathi Trust digital library. If you Google Hathi Trust, it's a free online library with a lot of old books, and you don't have to have an account or anything, just pull it up. But when you search for the proclaimed list, there are a lot of iterations, and you'll find not only the actual documents, but all of that was republished in different government publications when they communicated it out to the American public. So a lot of it in there, but it's fun to go through the list and kind of match up against, no, I've got this cover and this person's here on the list.
Right.
I mentioned, by the way, in my presentation, August Jaeger, the mechanic who was a hardcore Nazi. There was a small business called Jaeger Hermanas that was on, what was it? It was on the 7th Avenida, but north of the palace, on the north side of town. And they were originally on the list, but then they were pulled off because apparently they had the sisters had nothing to do with the Nazis. They shared the last name with, and I don't know if he was a brother or a cousin or what, but they shared a name with a guy who was on the list. So they were on for a little while, then they were taken off. And there's a number of covers you'll find from Jaeger Hermanas, which were not on the list and then taken off.
This would be a great exhibit.
Well, it's part of my German exhibit. So it's the, so I pick up, I start in the 1880s and it goes up through the deportation and, up through 1945. But it's fun to tell the story. And it really did mark a major change for Guatemala, and philatelically for all the collectors. All the pre-war stuff, a lot of it is to or from Germans, because they were meticulous in saving, envelopes and and a lot of them were avid stamp collectors too. So after that time, all of a sudden, all these, great covers just sort of poof, disappear. So philatelically, we see a real shift. Other questions? There are some parts of the German community where this is still a very sore subject, and there's a lot of emotional debates on both sides. There are people that say, were they really a danger to the U.S.? Well, there are arguments on both sides, because there are documented cases of German plans of espionage to the Panama Canal, based out of Guatemala. The U.S. had during the war had Army Air Corps planes that patrolled mostly the Pacific. The concern was that the Japanese might try a sneak attack on the Panama Canal like they had done in Hawaii. And so you had planes going out over the Pacific on patrol, watching for the Japanese fleet. So there was talk about sabotage to the American planes. There was also supposedly a plan to bring in a couple of small planes, sneak them up through Mexico, and do some kind of small attack across the border, more for psychological purposes. So there were a lot of concerns there for espionage and sabotage. But were there some people deported that, you know, just sat around saying, "Hey, I like Hitler"? Probably. But it was some of the activities. It was more than just having a couple of beers and praising Hitler. The Finca, Alabama, they used to have hardcore Nazi meetings there, and Gestapo agents would go to the meetings when they came through Guatemala. So there was definitely something nefarious afoot.
So what kind of Jewish population was there in Guatemala City?
Very, very small. And as the Nazification of the German community increased, they kept a very low profile. Jacob Engel, who owned La Paqueteria, one of the big stores in Guatemala City, he was a German Jew, but he didn't go to the German club. He didn't participate in that, and he just kind of kept his head down. The owner of La Perla for many years was a German Jew, and in the 30s he sold La Perla to another German and came back to the U.S. when he saw things weren't going well. And the guy that bought it from him was actually a Nazi, and that's why La Perla was put on the proclaim list. There was a very small contingent, but not very significant, and tiny compared to the ones who had been Nazified. Other questions, folks? Well, before we wrap up, I do want to say, if you're interested in sharing anything about Guatemala philately, you don't have to be an expert, just maybe your experience with it or something you like about it. Let me know. I am actively looking for folks to participate in these stamp chats. I don't want people to get tired of hearing just me up here blabbing away. So if you're interested, just drop me an email. I'd be happy to set you up for that. Again, you don't have to be an expert. Just something that you enjoy collecting with Guatemala. Share some, some pictures of what you have in your collection, things you're proud of, things you like. This is a time for all of us to share, and so let me know. So I am looking for people to do upcoming stamp chat presentations. So thanks a lot for your attention. Any last comments? Michael, anything from the president?
No, I'll say one quick comment. We get inquiries from folks who are in our organization. Dave and I got an inquiry the other day for a stamp that was normally in a dark green shade. Someone sent it in. I was scanned and said, "What is this? Is this a rarity, a forgery? What is it?" And the answer that Dave and I agreed on was, this is a color changeling. It was exposed to light or chemicals. So that's going on in the background.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I hope everybody has a wonderful philatelic day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.